I'm not worried about it yet, but you're right. It has taken over some jobs, like the jobs that entail like formulaic writing.
How people are conveying their thoughts through poetry, on Instagram and Tumblr.
It's a social media platform called Minus. And the idea is that you only have 100 posts for your entire life.
How do they find a voice that feels truthful?
A bus down the mountain, AC, traveler without teeth in the middle of a private street.
Good morning, sir. Hello. And it's good to be outside, isn't it? There will be a lot of disturbances here, but yeah, it's going to come out. Yeah, it's going to come out good in the video. But yeah, it's your first time in India, in Bangalore especially. How does it feel to be here?
It feels great, and I'm very happy to be invited to speak to you guys yesterday in your class about writing poetry. And I understand you have maybe the only MA program in creative writing in India, so it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
It is an honor for us also to study and get something from you as well. And thank you so much for accepting our proposal and giving out this interview for us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Kalyani.
I'm Alina Shajin.
Yeah. Hello, sir. And I just wanted to start off by asking you about form and structure of poetry itself. So you have translated haikus from Japanese to English, and you mostly write in free verse with slanted rhymes as well. So do you want to experiment or sort of come out of that free verse, or do you like sticking to that form itself?
I suppose I think of free verse itself as experimental, because in my way of thinking, it's not 100% free. There's always like a kind of ghost of form or touch of form. At least that's what I aspire to do. I want some shapeliness to my poems, even if they're not a received form, like a sonnet. So, for example, I might write a poem that's in loose syllabics, maybe 3 or 4 syllables a line, or even more idiosyncratic, sui generis kinds of forms that I might discover while I'm writing along the way. So I feel like, that is generative to me, like thinking about how to kind of crack a poem by discovering the form.
And I think free verse is being popularized now. It's being written by a lot of contemporary writers as well, and breaking out of the form is sort of the norm that you can see these days. So how do you see that going forward? Is that going to stick, or is that going to change?
I suppose it will more or less stick, but I think poets are always looking to the past as well for inspiration. So whether that's like classical Indian poetry or classical Japanese poetry or what have you, I know for me, I've looked a lot at classical Chinese poetry and Japanese poetry, and sort of borrowing and adapting older forms, but doing them in a different way. So I guess the art just sort of keeps regenerating. And I see that probably continuing.
Yeah, after all, art is an imitation of what you see around yourself, as Aristotle said, right? Yeah.
Right.
And you do use a lot of enjambments and symbolism in your work. So was that a deliberate choice from the beginning, or did you just go along the flow of writing?
Enjambment is probably just going with the flow, although I do have quite a few end-stopped lines in poems. Symbolism is interesting. I think of my poems primarily driven by images, and then whether or not the reader wants to pick that up as a metaphor or symbol is kind of up to them. And I probably get that a little bit from the haiku tradition,
right,
which are so image-driven, and yet those images can be loaded also and freighted with meaning, and that's fine. That's sort of affords other readings of a poem. But for me, because of English and the nature of our tradition, I'm sort of interested in like resonant images, but they're not I don't necessarily think of them as symbols or on the first reading as a metaphor. That comes later.
And I think in poetry too, you're trying to convey as much as possible in the least amount of words compared to prose. So, how does that sort of translate in your head, the ideas and the sort of emotions that you want to capture in your work?
I think even you can talk about how you inspire yourself to write. Maybe where do you get your inspiration from when you're writing?
Well, there's not a single source, I suppose. But at the end of the day, it's all like, it's probably coming a lot out of like just our subconscious, or at least in my case. So you have to be open to that, receptive to that little like that constant
The voice in
flow
your-
of thoughts
right,
in your head.
Yeah, right.
If it's a voice, it's many voices. But yeah, John Ashbery, American poet, said that he sort of thinks of writing a poem as like standing next to a river, a flow of thoughts, and you just dunk a bucket into the river and lift it up, and that's your poem for today. And yeah, that seems like a pretty like helpful model of writing a poem for me. Like I do a lot of automatic writing and sort of just to kind of get things going, and then see what coheres.
You work across a lot of fields, like you're a writer, you're a teacher, and during that process you also edit and translate as well. So do you think these influence each other? I mean, the roles influence each other, and how do you balance between them?
I love translating poetry, and I do think that it finds its way into my own work, whether that's little times when I self-translate something into another language and back into English to help me re-see the line or image, or if it's even just the act of close reading, which translation entails, and then bringing that attention to my own work or poetry I'm reading in English. And also just at the level of being in conversation with poets from other languages, like Sayumi Kamakura, the Japanese poet I've translated, or Yam Gong, a Hong Kong poet I co-translated. So yeah, it's operating on different levels that influence.
And sort of when you're looking at translation itself, understanding the cultural nuances is very important, because at least I feel that way, because without that, I don't think you will be able to understand or even convey the nuance of what is being written properly. So especially in the work that you translated called Haiku on Shit by Masaiko Shinkai, right?
Masaiko Shiki.
Shiki,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So how, especially in a sort of work like that, an essay like that, I feel like the cultural nuance is very important in something as such, that is conveying, because you don't see that sort of thing or talking about things that are, gross or grotesque in a way in other parts of the world, at least that doesn't come to the mainstream, because we usually tend to romanticize poetry. At least that's the sort of thing that I have seen throughout. So what's your take on that?
Well, so you're kind of right in a sense that Shiki, anyway, argues that haiku is uniquely suited to write about grotesque subject matter, like excrement. He says that, Western poetry can't do it. Even Chinese poetry can't do it. I don't know about Indian poetry. Are you aware of any Indian poetry that's about excrement?
No, I think we are also more of the romanticizing of
Right.
life itself.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So something happened with the haiku tradition in the 1600s, 1700s, where it became a form that allowed people to write about everyday experience. And even Shiki says that most of these poems are not that successful, but some are. And he says that he thinks it's because haiku is so short, it's able to harmonize something sort of grotesque with something beautiful and to make it work, make it successful.
And how big of a challenge was it for you to translate a work like that?
It was a long process. I kind of picked it up and put it down for many years. And then finally, I was living in Nebraska and made friends with Ikuho Amano, a professor of Japanese literature. And she and I co-translated it and finally put it together. it was fun though, because it's something that I thought would be of interest to American readers, and now it's online, so a lot of people in other places are reading it too, which is cool.
And I think it would have been fun, like collaborating with someone to do it. I think it sort of encouraged you or motivated you to do it, to complete the work, because as you said, you put it down, right? So
right, yeah, I put it down for a long time, and then met her, and we started talking. She had an interest in the grotesque as well, and so we finally were able to
collaborate
work together and finish it.
So, between writing your own works and translating others' works, which do you feel is more demanding, and which one would you prefer?
Well, it's definitely probably more demanding. I mean, they're demanding in their own ways, differently, but I think writing poems is demanding in the sense that you don't know when it ends. You have to kind of trust your instincts to know when a poem is finished. Whereas with a translation, if it's 10 lines, then you kind of know more or less that your translation will be 10 lines if the original is 10 lines. So that kind of helps. It gives you like a loose template. But with my own poetry, it's a judgment call when to finish.
I think haikus make it easier for you as well because they are short, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean that. Although this book by Sayumi, I think there's something like 250 or something like that. There's over 200 haiku in here.
In there, right?
So it's quite a substantial piece of work in that sense.
Right. And you have seen the writing programs across the world, especially in Chicago and Hong Kong. So how do you how can you compare or see what are the differences that those sort of programs have compared to what we have here in the last few days you've spent here in Bangalore?
Well, I'm still getting to know your program, but I think at the end of the day, there's this sense in which there's a community that's built between the classmates, even with the instructor, the teachers, and you're sort of all in this together and trying to help each other write better work. And that requires critique. What's working, what's not working. And that's built on honesty. You have to kind of trust that people are giving you candid advice and impressions of your work. So to me, that's one of the through lines. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm in Hong Kong. I teach in this bilingual creative writing program, Chinese and English side by side. So students graduate with this degree where they've taken basically an equal amount of classes in Chinese and English. And I'm kind of become more and more interested in sort of the student as multilingual and how they can bring and tap into all their languages as they write. And I feel like as the students I've met here, everyone's multilingual. And that seems to be like a potential for interesting work, unique writing.
As you just mentioned about the bilingual creative writing classes, so how do you think that both languages influence or maybe they get in the way between writing? So how does the language or their cultural background influence or change the way poetry is written or discussed?
Big question. But to me, it's not a limitation. It doesn't have to be. I would try to reframe it as sometimes I tell my students it's like a superpower if you have like other languages at your fingertips. So for example, what if you were to try writing in English but using the syntax or the grammar of another language? It would be a kind of opportunity to maybe defamiliarize how English is written.
I think
even if it's just,
I think it would be a translator's nightmare to sort of get it across to another audience.
Right. That's another question.
Right.
Yeah. But
and also you're talking about critiquing. So how important is critiquing a work, and what sort of let's say a method that you go by while critiquing? Do you are you very rigid with it, or as you said, honesty is important. So how do you sort of put that in practice with your students?
Even with my students,
right, yeah.
Well, when they come into the classroom, we're all writers. That's fundamental. So, I think of them as fellow writers. And so, like with my friends who are writers and we share work, I'm honest with them, what I think is
Working and not working.
Yeah. And I think when you build up that trust and that honesty, then that helps for them to believe, okay, when I say something you should try to revise, then they hopefully would take that more seriously, because I've also told them what I think works. And a lot of times it's a yin yang kind of thing. Like, if you're really good at one element, sometimes another element might be suffering. So, for example, like if a poem is super musical, you could risk like losing the reader in terms of like its meaning
of
it, like maybe it's getting lost. So, or vice versa.
Yeah, so you have taught and lived both in the US and Hong Kong. So what are the differences you find in the writing procedure in both the places? And do you think it has shaped your writing as well? So when you were in the US and your writing was different, and once you were in Hong Kong, it changed your way of writing or your approach to writing?
I guess I may be too close to it to be able to answer it very well. Like, it's a self-reflexive kind of position to be in. But I definitely have some poems that are about sort of my experiences in Hong Kong that are in this new book. But at the same time, I have poems that I wrote in Hong Kong where the setting feels to me like it's in the Midwest where I grew up, or somewhere in the US. So in some ways, one way I think about this is that, because I often go back to the US at least once a year, that in some ways my poems are about being in transit more than being in a fixed place, if you know what I mean. And I also think of poetry as very akin to dreams, and the way that you kind of move so swiftly in a dream is kind of also how I think, my life kind of feels like a dream sometimes, like, especially when you're jet lagged after traveling.
Right, yeah.
It takes a week to recover.
Right. I don't think you get much work done at that time.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm interested in that feeling of transit than place sometimes. Yeah.
Being stationary. Right.
Yeah.
Static.
Yeah.
Static. Yeah, static is a good word. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of, could you maybe read a couple of poems from your latest work?
Sure. So this is Last Day of My Face.
Okay.
And I can read maybe a poem that speaks to some of your questions about form and about place.
Okay.
So this is a poem I wrote after a year or two of living in Hong Kong. And it's in the form of a quatrain. And it was inspired by a classical Chinese poem that was 4 or 5 lines. And in that poem, the poet uses only one verb. So I thought, well, let me try writing a poem in this style, but I'll try to avoid any verb at all. And the poet's name is Ma Juyen. And so this poem is called After Ma Juyen. Electric valley, a little wind, indefinite clouds, an old snail, 2 monkeys, 6-inch moth on the balcony, coral green trees, a bus down the mountain, AC, traveler without teeth in the middle of a private street. I can read another one that you mentioned, That's That.
That's That, yeah. Found it quite intriguing, actually.
Sure. That's that. Certain words I dislike. Ooze, lozenge. Other words I love. Katydid, bumblebee. Take that, for instance. How it comes fat from the mouth. Nowhere to elide it, massage it. It's a pronoun. That's what I like. a conjunction that I might love, an adverb, that much, an adjective, that word sounds like what it stands for, isness. This is quieter, less of a claim. I defer to the sure sense of things. That's how I approach catastrophe.
The use of that itself is recurring again. I think the repetition speaks for itself in that poem. Yeah. And I did want to ask this sort of a loaded question, I feel, but just about social media and how people are conveying their thoughts through poetry, through on Instagram and Tumblr. I think Tumblr was the 2010s, and Instagram is still going around, where people either in captions or they put up a post or story with their poetry. So, how do you think that is influencing people or influencing the genre of poetry itself?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that
Right.
because I don't have any social media whatsoever.
Okay, right, yeah.
But my impression from students is, yeah, they're all on IG. And I actually teach a class called Writing for New Media, where we look at sort of how poets use the internet. And so I want to get students beyond Instagram, beyond some of the familiar platforms. There's this cool, I guess it's kind of an art project. It's a social media platform called Minus. And the idea is that you only have 100 posts for your entire life. So you have to be really thoughtful about which posts you put up online. And so I had my students do a project where they had to either create a character or be themselves and write a series of posts. Like, how would you use this platform given these constraints? I mean, yeah, but however people want to spread poetry sounds good to me.
Okay, so it's either presses
As
it,
long as it's
whatever
alive.
press it's either way, it's good, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's going around, if it's being promoted, right? Yeah.
I think so. And you know, and in my class, I try to have students bring some like criticality to their relationship to the internet. But you know, given that, you know, if they want to share poems online and on IG, that's sounds good.
And I think one more phenomenon that's going around is the use of AI, especially in creative writing.
Yeah, I was
So,
just about to ask that.
right, yeah. And a lot of prose, I think, is easier for AI to generate, but I think poetry lacks that sort of depth. You cannot find much of nuance in a poetry. So, at least that's produced by AI. So, do you see that changing? Or
Have you tried using it to write
we have
poems?
dabbled with it just to see how it works. So we sort of had an assignment based on that, just to see how AI is going to produce it, so that we can do better, maybe. Or just to see what kind of outcomes are there, where it's searching things from, where it's taking things from. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you found it limited.
It is pretty
Poetry
basic.
Yeah, poetry. Yeah, compared to prose, yes.
It can seem to do a competent story, a lot of cliches, but poetry, yeah, the default is to make it rhyme, give it like these kind of sort of familiar rhymes and also cliches. I guess, well, two things. One is we don't know where it's going to be in 5 years. I mean, it could be much more sophisticated, probably will be. Secondly, I think it could be useful if you want to maybe employ it in a way it wasn't designed to be used for, like get it to kind of, some writers have been kind of using AI to help co-write something. Some of the results have been interesting. I have a friend, he's using it to talk to about a draft of his poem. So he writes a draft, not sure exactly what it's doing, how it's working, feeds it into AI, and then it starts talking to it about like, what do you think it's about?
Right.
Which I think is kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever used AI for your works?
Just dabbled, like you said.
Right,
yeah. I haven't written a poem with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not like, yeah, I think, you know, it's a part of the world, so it's fair game for writing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't take over our jobs. So,
Yeah.
that's
At
all we
least
can
as a
hope for.
writer.
At least as a writer. Yeah.
I'm not worried about it yet, but you're right. It has taken over some jobs, like the jobs that entail like formulaic writing, journalism, for example. But well, let's see.
Yeah. Oh, fingers crossed, I guess. Yeah.
So I think we're wrapping up with just one question.
Sure.
So when there are young poets or budding poets who write, as I told, they come from different backgrounds, and how do you think what advice would you give for them to find a voice between those two languages or between those two cultures? How do they find a voice that feels truthful? What advice would you give the young poets on that?
Well, I if you have got more than one language at your disposal, I would say that's an asset, and lean into that. And then, of course, read work in the language that you want to write in. Frankly, I mean, of course, translations are great, but reading the sort of model work that you admire, that you aspire to write, is probably one of the best things you can do. And then, like you guys are doing, create a community, like find like-minded writers, share your work with each other. That'll help buoy you, sustain you for a while, especially when you're struggling, if you're struggling.
Yeah, I think that's it for
that's
today.
great.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here with us, as well as for the workshop yesterday too. And
Yeah.
I think
Giving
a few.
out such
Yeah.
good insights.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much,
Thank you
and
so much.
have a happy return back to Hong Kong.
Okay.